Welcome back to the Social Currency Marketing Podcast. I'm Tuck Ross, and joining me, as always, is my good friend, Jess Jensen. Jess, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you, Tuck?
Good. We appreciate you guys joining us. So Social Currency is a marketing podcast all about digital marketing, social media, and getting you current quick on all the things happening in our space today so that you can walk into the boardroom, your meeting, your next, engagement and talk intelligently, knowing exactly what's happening in the space. And that's what we're here to do today. We're actually talking about influencers, and it's a topic that's so close to our hearts. We're super engaged with this because it is one of the hot topics, especially within social media. And this new report that just came out is such a highlight in terms of helping explain what the space is all about. What do you think about this, Jess?
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about this topic, and I know that we did cover influencer marketing quite a ways back on the Social Currency podcast. So episodes 14 and 15, we spoke to kind of a two-part interview with David Kogan, who is a quote-unquote micro-influencer in the tech industry. So certainly check those episodes out if you're interested in this topic and want to go deeper. But since it's been a while, and this great report did just get released this month, March of 2019, from Emarketer, we thought we would return to the topic because there's a few things in here that are discussed that we didn't really get to with David that are a bit more macro about kind of the evolution of influencer marketing. I do. Yeah. And I do just want to quickly just give credit, because this is such an in-depth report, to Debra Aho Williamson. So she's the lead analyst and researcher at Emarketer that pulled this together, conducted lots of interviews, and thank you to Debra for including us in the research and also allowing us to speak to this.
Yeah. And just as a highlight, this report actually starts out with a talk that this is really influencer marketing for marketing plans of all types of business across the world. And it's really here to pinpoint the ways that marketers are using influencer marketing successfully and how they're getting past some of the issues that are holding the tactic back. So if you're looking for this type of report, again, call it to Emarketer. We'll be calling out some highlights from the report as we go through. But definitely check this out, and we'll be linking to this in the show notes, as well as providing some information at the end if you want to check it out.
So there's a few different areas that Debra and her team have used to kind of organize the structure of this report, which again is almost 20 pages. It's very in-depth, so we'll just kind of cover the top line. One is around the percentage of spend that different types of brands, B2B, B2C, small, medium, big, what percentage of their spend are they actually allocating to influencer marketing these days? Another area that she explores is the actual platforms, the social platforms, and where influencers gravitating, therefore where marketers focusing their attention. And then another one is the notion of fraud, which we haven't really covered at all on this podcast, which is another interesting topic. I think we briefly touched on it in our interview with Michael Stelzner, but this is a whole area that obviously needs some exploration. So where do you want to start?
I think starting out with the broad topic of social media, since influencers are in social, I think there's some great call outs right here at the beginning, talking about companies worldwide and how they've, adopted strategies, really leading the way with social, and social being such a high priority. Almost half of all businesses focusing on social media as the top expansion effort within their marketing toolkit. And, that's something that we've talked about, social being such a high priority about all these platforms. This is above things like mobile applications, in-store, even influencers, video, omnichannel, that they're really focusing on social in general to help drive their business forward.
And in fact, they estimate that somewhere between 25 and 50% of marketers are using influencer marketing as some element of the mix, which is a lot, right? A quarter to half are incorporating influencer marketing into the marketing mix. And even though influencer marketing's been around for a really long time, it's evolved. And I also think that brands that are more in the B2B space, perhaps more services over products, they've kind of come on board and broaden the scope of the types of businesses that are actually able to tap into influencer marketing.
Yeah, just a quick highlight, just to define influencer marketing in case you're catching up. Influencer marketing is really the effort of paying someone for the use of their audience in promoting your brand or product. So leveraging an individual who has a certain authority or presence or a personal brand with a specific audience that you want to access. And so you're paying for that access for your brand or product. So just to highlight that, because there is a difference between what is listed as influencer marketing and then separate things like customer advocacy or employee advocacy, which could also be considered influencer marketing of types.
Yeah, and Tuck, you and I have spoken a little bit about that definition of who is an influencer, and I love the way that you've put it. Kind of, it's more of a portfolio approach versus a one and done. Do you want to talk a little bit about the different types of people that could be considered influencers?
Yeah, it's a good call out. I've always looked at it as a five-fold approach. And if you want to number them off on your hands, the first one being celebrity influencers, which all of us are familiar with and is related to this topic. And then also micro slash nano influencers, which would be ones that either have a specific expertise. Micro influencers are defined as an audience of 10,000 plus, and nano is a little under 10,000. Those ones that you'd be paying for access for their authenticity and reach with audience. The three extra categories, which I think are super interesting and not paid attention to enough, really, are things like social executives. And we've had an episode about this, talking about how executives like CEOs or C-suite or even critical managers and business owners in the organization have the ability to provide influence and sway just because of their authority in the organization and the presence they have within that business. Employees, because, by the way, they own the business. They're part of the business every day, and having their presence within the brand not only helps drive that authenticity and connection within a business, but also outbound because they are part of the business that they're promoting. And then, lastly but not least, I think this is actually the most important one, is customers. And customers, because they are part of not only who you are, but they're also helping define your brand, especially in social spaces, and how they use your product, how they engage with your product in terms of their lifestyle. So critical in terms of how that's actually being communicated and visible. They are your primary awareness driver. They're the ones consuming your product. They know you best, are a key influencer as well. So those are the five that I've always looked to. Again, we're talking a little bit more about the celebrity, micro, nano in this case, but don't forget about social executives, employees, and customers, because those three groups are also super critical to your campaigns.
Yeah, I love that perspective, that these are all specialized groups of people who have some sort of persuasion and also are believable. And I think at its very core, that's where influencer marketing started. It was the idea that brands wanted a reputable, believable, quote unquote, authentic voice that would endorse a product or a service, therefore enticing whoever the target audience was to buy it more so than if it was just the brand talking about themselves.
Yeah, you're right. It's back to word of mouth, right? Back to word of mouth, which is where we know everything starts. And true, real marketing, nothing is more authentic and endorsed than true word of mouth, which again could start with a customer, can be someone that's employee or executive. And brands are now looking for influencers, hopefully that consume their product, but at least ones that are believable enough to be able to share this product with their audience in an authentic way.
Yeah, and this is also worth mentioning. This is a global scenario. So like everything, digital is international. There's no question about it. Just inherently it is. The internet's global. But they specifically go into some research in this report where Debra talks about what it looks like in different markets. And one of the ones that I'll highlight is China, just because I have a little bit of experience there through the work I've done. They talk about there being around 60% of brands in China are utilizing influencer marketing, which is higher than the rest of the world, higher even than the US. This doesn't surprise me at all. They often refer to them as KOLs, key opinion leaders there. And that's been going on for a long, long time, and is actually in many ways more robust and, quote, sophisticated of a initiative within the marketing mix than it might be here in North America. And part of the reason that's interesting, again, it's just cultural, is that in China, there seems to be a little bit more of a lean-in approach to believing what influencers say. However, they also distinguish between people that kind of are influencers just because they are on social media versus folks that actually are influencers due to being an authority in a certain area. So it's almost like they're a step ahead of us in terms of their sophistication and categorization of influencer marketing there.
It's always good to look at, I think, international markets, to your point, and see, because a lot of the markets tend to be more sophisticated, or they've leapfrogged, a stage, so they're a little more advanced. And China, great example that you bring up. And it's interesting to see how they are using it, because there is more leaning in. Again, it's not that it's brand new in the US, because we've had things like Amazon reviews and 5-star ratings on Yelp and the rest of these types of things. But really looking at China of more of this social influencer platform, especially around, things like short videos and live streaming, and how they're talking about products in social, specifically on WeChat and other channels like Weibo, to be able to communicate the value that, the products are to their audience.
Yeah. And we've mentioned a couple of times that influencer marketing's been around for a long time. I would consider celebrity endorsements back in the day, again, whether it was with a beverage brand or a detergent brand or fill in a car brand. I mean, there's so many examples from the world of TV decades ago where a celebrity would be hired to endorse a certain product, and that became somehow more believable and authentic, which is kind of funny when you think about it, because it's the opposite. They're literally being hired to say these things. And so to me, influencer marketing has started way, way back then, and it's evolved now to be people who are either actually, again, authorities or have an in-depth knowledge about a certain category, vertical, product, which is the most authentic in my mind. Or B, the other scenario that really has only come up in the last 5-10 years is this idea of people who are famous only because of their social media following. And that's a new category, right, that didn't exist decades ago when there were celebrities endorsing things.
Right, which is, I think, why we're talking about this as being a revival of sorts. It's influencer marketing 2.0, because again, this isn't a new thing. It's just taken hold of late, because I think the new platforms allow a lot easier opportunity for influencers to share their opinion, their ideas, the visual of the product, because video is so accessible now, and especially in such an engaging way, that it makes it interesting for brands to be able to play in the space, especially as individuals and personal brands are gaining such huge audiences.
Yeah. So good segue on the platform topic. That's a whole section within this report. I know we've talked a lot about the different platforms in depth. Do you want to speak a little bit to where we see influencers really penetrating and sort of getting the most traction from a platform perspective?
Yeah, it's Instagram. The end.
Easy. Done.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
Instagram.
It's really Instagram, right? And Instagram's really this powerful place that influencer marketing is happening, not just here, but across the world. And I think it's funny, because you look at where it's actually engaging on Instagram. It's Instagram Stories, which is, as we've talked about, a stolen feature from Snapchat. And they actually admitted it a couple weeks back, that they just said, yep, we blatantly copied everything from Snapchat and turned it into Instagram. And now it's not only their biggest feature, it's where Facebook's leaning into in terms of their content track, right? With Mark Zuckerberg coming out a couple weeks ago and saying, the only thing that matters is messaging and stories. And that's what they're doing. And now, if you're looking at where, these users and influencers are gaining so much traction, it's with stories itself, which again, if you're not familiar, don't use it every day. Stories is the vertical video, short, 24-hour living only video pieces that exist on an individual profile. They sit in little bubble buttons on top of your Instagram profile, and those refresh every 24 hours, and you have to keep them populated if you want to keep them interested. But that's where consumers are continually creating a lot of fresh new content, and that influencers are getting the most traction around the pieces that they're sharing. One, because they're engaging, but two, also for a lot of different pieces, because you can include links depending on if you have over 10,000 followers or not. You can include different information. You can sequence stories. You can do a ton of different things with Instagram stories, and they feel very authentic because they are on the fly. They're not as polished as a post would be, and they feel so much more authentic, to our point earlier.
Yeah. A couple things I want to just kind of double down on based on what you were just talking about. Number one, definitely agree. Instagram is the space that influencers are playing in most heavily. And we talked about the fact that it still actually gets some decent amount of organic reach, which again, if I'm a marketer, I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm loving that, right? Because I'm going to get, a couple of key people that I think are authentic and knowledgeable about my industry, my product, my service. I can commission them potentially for not a ton of money. And guess what? They're going to get organic reach because A, Instagram still allows for that. B, they're optimizing for stories. Instagram is optimizing for stories, and so it gives it even more of a boost. And then C, obviously, that those influencers are going to reach their own followings in addition to mine. So like it's kind of just a win across the board. Plus you have the built-in beauty of, as you were just saying, the as we love our favorite word, the ephemeral nature of stories and the fact
I can't say it. You can say it.
I'll say it.
Thank you.
I'll help you out.
I need a shirt.
So like I think the influencers love that too, right? Because if they are doing a number of brand deals, as they will refer to them, then they're not cluttering up their own feed with the permanence of all those brand partnerships. It's in and out in 24 hours, and it's not permanently tattooed or attached to their profile, which is a win for them.
Yeah, I mean, these are awesome formats for not only influencers, but also us, right, as consumers. And it's because they are short, right? You talked about it, and they are video. A lot of cases, sometimes they're static. They're highly visible. They're temporary, so they can go away for someone that doesn't want to retain that necessarily on their profile. They can go very fluid. But a brand can actually put them into their highlights so that they don't lose the effect of those and can maintain that influencer's visibility on their profile. They are authentic, like we talked about. And I think the fifth point here is that they have the ability to put in links, like we talked, which creates this opportunity for tracking, which is very difficult with stories because they are hard to measure in terms of influence. But if you have them track to a link, you can track that link, and then and actually if you get them off of stories, you have the ability to then retarget them, which you actually don't have in stories. So there's a little bit of double-edged sword there, but in terms of the impact and effect, again, that's where attention is. That's why they're having so much traction.
Yeah, and that's a really important, although it seems like a detail, a really important takeaway that I gleaned from this report. If you think about how do you drive business impact, or how do you attach ROI to social and or influencer marketing, in many cases and for many brands, it's hard. There's a lot of sort of proxy metrics or directional results like growing brand favorability. But I love the idea of being able to link outbound links from Instagram stories to your website, let's just say, and actually in the brief with the influencer, agreeing to that's the payment model, right? So, every time you send a link over to a certain page on .com, you're going to get paid X. And so, or if you reach a certain threshold of sending over referral traffic, you get paid Y. It depends on obviously your business, your service, or your product that you're selling. But if that's something that's important to you, is just traffic driving of qualified or potentially qualified leads to your website, you could actually set up your agreement with the influencer with that in mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So let's talk about your marketing objectives, right? Because we're talking a little bit about the channel and the tactics. But, I think if I'm going into brand, I'm curious about, how do I find an influencer? How do I create that attribution tracking as part of building a program? And then what am I really having that influencer do? So I think if I go a little bit deeper in this report, one of the things that I found interesting was, how have influencers supported the marketing strategy? What are brands actually having them do? And one of the big call outs here is that number one across the board, talking about having influencers help brand awareness of a product launch or campaign. And again, if you're engaging multiple influencers and getting that reach, especially for a new product, there's probably no better way to get a scalable model than influencers, at least for that efficiency of cost, because it's going to work better, faster than a paid media campaign, and it's coming across as much more authentic in an introductory type of way, whether it's unboxing or a debut reveal or a live stream or whatever it is, to get that attention on your product coming out the gate. The second one being, that influencers have increased consumer engagement, like we've talked about. And the third is that they've made marketing messages more relatable, which again goes back to that authenticity that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think the authenticity is probably strongest in that micro influencer category. Most of my experience is in that space as well. And you mentioned it quickly at the top, but one of the things that this report delves into is the way in which different brands categorize influencers. And so again, of course, there's a classic sort of like celebrity, multi-million follower accounts that are folks that are athletes, they're actresses, or they're just social media stars, but they're expensive.
Kardashians.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hashtag Kardashians. Yeah, I mean, so like there's obviously that category that I think is often what people immediately go to when they hear the word influencer. But there's this notion of micro-influencer, which again is maybe 10,000 to 100,000 followers. And that actually is just one measure. I always hesitate when we look at follower count as like the ultimate metric. And one of the things that they get into when it comes to the fraud discussion, but I think is just pertinent across the board, is engagement rate. So, I mean, if someone has 100,000 followers, and they've got an under 1% engagement rate, you got to pause and go, what's going on? Like they've got a bunch of reach, but they don't have a lot of engagement. So either some of those followers are fake, or they're not interacting with their audience on a regular basis. Their audience perhaps is scattered and splintered and not the right folks, or their content maybe isn't so great. Something's off. So I think it's always important to look at the follower count combined with things like engagements and how even reading the comments, like under a YouTube video, for example, let alone any of the social platforms, but how much is that influencer actually going back and forth with their audience in real time and like literally engaging in conversation? That to me is a huge litmus test for whether or not I would consider them to be associated with the brand.
Again, it goes back to authenticity. Theoretically, an influencer's built their audience because they've engaged with their audience. They have an audience that's dedicated to their topic or the certain type of expertise that they have, which is why they're there. And that's what you want them for, which is why you want to look at that as a metric. And so it's about quality over quantity. And, I think as a brand, I'd want a much smaller audience that is much more engaged than I'd want a larger audience that's completely disconnected. And those numbers are just there, to your point. You want like Jesus and the 12 disciples. You don't want the Kardashians. I'm just saying.
Great analogy. You just said Kardashian and Jesus in the same breath. There's something.
I was trying to pull that out. That was actually like I was planning that the whole time.
Yeah. So we talked about celebrity influencers, and with my hands, I'm gesturing like a top of the pyramid.
I know we've both been gesturing like we're on like a video camera, filming a show right now. That's next.
Micro-influencer. And then there's this term nano-influencer, which I just love. I'm like, am I a nano? Am I actually...
Oh, they're just making stuff up. You're a nano-influencer. Yeah.
I think if you have like over 100 followers on Twitter, you're considered nano. No. But I what I do like is the strategic kind of paradigm of how do you build a mix? Do you have some of each of those three categories? Do you have... a lot in the middle, in that micro category, that are deep, authentic, knowledgeable, again, rich in your industry with your product or service and really know their stuff? Are you using quote unquote nano influencers to kind of prime the pump, to kind of get them in young and early and fresh in hopes that they will, sort of blossom over time? But I hadn't really thought about that before I read this report. And I thought this is so smart to actually categorize them and then think about how do you almost move them through your marketing mix over the course of months or years.
Yeah, I think there's two thoughts in that. One thought is, if you're starting out with these 5 categories, if you don't have a budget, go after the easy ones that you can access. You can access your customers, you can access your employees, you can access your executives. So go after those and think about how do you maximize the reach of the people that already love you and know you. I think that's where you start. If you have a little bit of budget and you've either thought about tapping those or it's more complex for whatever reason, you can go after, I think, the next ones, which to your point, is interesting to think about, like, how do you staff that? And looking at some of the numbers here, celebrity is probably not the first place to start. 1, because they're expensive, and 2, because they actually create the least amount of traction and they create the least amount of sales because, it probably appears to be the least authentic unless they're obviously moving their own product. So to that point, you then would want to look at this micro nano influencer around expertise or topics or categories that they're focused on, and building a roster of a little bit bigger ones, a little bit smaller ones. And I think you mentioned, and we were talking about this before the show, a retail brand that is actually almost building a farm team of the smaller ones moving through. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. There's an example in this report. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail because I certainly want everyone listening, if they're interested, to definitely purchase the report, which we'll link to in the show notes as to how to do that. But, there is a couple brands that were included here that talk about, like you said, the farm team and how do you perhaps get a group of folks that are kind of, early on, but seem to be knowledgeable about a certain industry and build relationships with them for the long haul, which I also highly recommend. I'm all about, this is probably where influencers really bleed the closest into the PR world, but I'm all about build a relationship for the long term with these guys and girls and nurture that. And, you're vetting for like, are they a personality fit? Do they match the brand personality? Do they have charisma? Are they authentic? Are they knowledgeable? Are they just kind of good people that you want to associate yourself with? And then if they grow and again, kind of evolve into that next level where maybe this is now becoming their full-time job and they have bigger followings, not only do you have this historical relationship with them, but you're probably also going to get better rates because they know you, they've been working with you for quite a while, and they're going to have some loyalty to you as a person as well as the brand itself.
Yeah. I think as an encouragement, looking at these different type of things, because again, I'm thinking about like, what's my ROI as I go into any of these programs and however I build it. It is demonstrating that influencers are driving sales. Especially some of these numbers are around retail brands, but I think in general, not only are they driving sales, but in terms of discovery, product discovery, brand discovery. In some cases, influencers are actually driving overweight contribution to the awareness of a product, even more than friends are in these spaces. And I think that's encouraging for a brand to think about because, if you're debating on should we be thinking about influencer strategies, should we be including this in our marketing mix? I think at this point we would say yes, because while word of mouth is authentic, obviously from friends and consumers, having a formalized influencer program does create that potential for awareness that you may not get from an uneven distribution of your customers.
Yeah, agreed. And so maybe we'll segue into one of the last sections of the report, which is really around fraud and the idea of sort of the darker side of influencer marketing, and even the word influencer. In the work I've done, which has just, been a few years, I've definitely even learned terminology. Many of the folks we work with prefer the term creator, for example, versus influencer. And it talks a little bit about some of that vocabulary in this fraud section of the report. This idea that influencers are, right? I know. We have to get our vocabulary.
These guys, this is like, call me a creative.
Right,
no,
right,
you're an effing designer. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. I can be a little pretentious. I agree.
Yeah. I'm a creative marketing. It's like, no, you're an influencer. I'm sorry.
I remember I have asked a number of the folks that we've worked with over the years, hey, like directly, do you like being called an influencer? Like, how does that feel if I say that word to you? And many of them are like, it's fine. Like, we get that that's what you guys call us. You guys being
you guys,
the companies.
Y'alls. That's why you alls calls us. Yeah.
So we get that you know us for that and you call us that, and that's fine. But like, would we ever introduce ourselves as hi, my name's Jessica and I'm an influencer? Hell no. Would never say that, would never write that, would never use that term with each other. So again, I've heard the term creator used the most frequently as kind of a substitute for that. And I agree, it does get a little pretentious. I'm in it for the art. But we're poking at it.
I'm going to put it aside though, because just as like we talked about in the earlier episodes, especially with David, who much respect, right? I think the part of the process of engaging with an influencer is this is not a PR push channel. You are literally going to them not only because of their influence, but because of what they create. And you should be collaborating with them. You should be developing with them. You should use their ideas on how to approach their audience, because it is their audience and they need to maintain authenticity and they need to be able to tell their story with your brand in context. So, while we are poking fun at it, it is intentional that these are creators because they do have a craft, and you need to be mindful of their craft when you're going into this, with the assumption that they're leading the way and you are part of their storyline as much as you want to be included.
Yeah, I agree. And that's been my experience, honestly. And that's part of the reason I'm so bullish on, today's version of influencer marketing. Again, if you pick the right people, and again, I lean more into micro-influencers that are deeper and more have more authority in a certain industry, then you do have that authenticity. You do have that knowledge base built in that's much more believable than certainly a celebrity level, or frankly, many times the brand itself. So I love the authority and the believability piece. I also love what you were just talking about, which is this notion that they are creators, and they are in many cases much closer day in and day out to their audiences, and they're reading the comments,
Yes.
they're engaging, they're looking at their engagement rate, they're looking at all their metrics because this is their livelihood. And so we might have teams that do listening, social listening, or that provide, coverage reports, or that look at our quarterly, numbers over versus a year ago. But there's no way that we're going to be nearly as in depth as they can be, because this is all they do. And so I very much have learned to trust their judgment and ask for their input on creative, because they are so close to their audiences.
Yeah. Good call out. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about the fraud piece, because I think we went on a quick tangent there, a little 3-hour tour. But back to topic at hand, what's on fraud here? Because I think it's a real issue. Obviously, we're reading every day about how there's inflation of numbers, about bots, about people using services to grow their audience following. I know every time I post now, I literally get an email or a DM from somebody that says, "Hey, I can help with your following. Pay me, like $40 a month, and we'll boost it up." Legitimately, quote. I think it's a business now, right? It's a business to essentially help defraud by inflating your numbers, and I think it's a real challenge for brands. In addition to what you talked about in terms of checking the engagement, what other tools do brands have to be able to address what may be a concern here in identifying the right influencers versus the fraudulent ones?
I agree that there's definitely that the kind of the platforms as one avenue, right? There are platforms that can help scour for what looks like fake followers or patterns that would lead us to believe that there's something fishy going on. Now, that might be something that maybe a larger brand would employ. I think sometimes this can honestly just kind of get down to like sort of common sense and spending some time on these influencers platforms. Again, looking at how many engagements or how many comments do they actually have versus the reach or the impressions they seem to be generating, the video view numbers. If it's way skewed, way high video views or way high impressions and not so many engagements, comments, or back and forth dialogue, that's a red flag. So that can be done obviously manually. Certainly if you've got the support of an agency, they can help with that too. If you can't afford or aren't ready to license a platform itself to do this. I think another red flag that they talk about in this report, and again, I've had experience, really a very positive experience to date on this, is the notion of disclosure. It's still unfortunately relatively squishy, but the FCC, at least here in the U.S., very much states clearly that if you're being paid to endorse a product, you need to disclose that you have a relationship, you have a partnership there. And they even go down to the detail of, you should be using the word #sponsored, #partner, #ad. And still many of them are not doing that. And so again, common sense to me is if I reach out to an influencer, someone who I'm interested in, and they aren't willing to do that, they aren't just offering to, of course, I'm going to say that this is a partnership or a sponsorship, that's a signal to me that there's something not quite right.
Yeah, agreed. So, there's the influencer marketing platforms that you can reach out to, and they can actually farm your project to their roster. You can go to an influencer marketing agency to help with this type of thing, and both of these platforms are vetted. And then you can also do this yourself, and there's a couple of individual kind of self-serve platforms that help identify the right influencers for your reach. But I think, to your point, especially when you're starting out, take a little bit of time, have your social media team take some time to vet the influencers and go out the door with a handful that that you've talked to, that are legitimate and can also engage with you and interact and put together a proposal for the type of campaign that they would run, because you just don't want to go out the door with money to people that may have a large following, but you just aren't sure or don't know about.
Yep. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the idea of different categories of influencers, kind of big, medium, small, or up and coming farm team, which I love that term, to sort of build the future of your program. We've talked about the idea of how this is actually very much an international, global trend. Instagram being at the forefront, at least in most of the markets outside of China in terms of their platform of choice. Obviously, that'd probably be something like WeChat in China. And then we've also talked about the idea of fraud and just having kind of a watchful eye and using some common judgment around bigger is not always better, and making sure that we're following, best practices in terms of disclosure. So lots of different pieces of this pie, but I think you and I both agree this should be a part of your marketing mix, regardless of product, service, B2B, B2C, big, small. It's not going to go away, and it continues actually to evolve and get more and more interesting.
Yeah, agreed. If you're getting influencer marketing, I think think about like the things that we've talked about, just to encapsulate really quickly, is think about the authenticity of what you're selling, right? And think about who do you want to connect with that product. And if you have someone on social that you can reach out to that can connect with that influencer, those set of influencers can help you reach and influence a demographic or certain topic audience or segment that may be interested in that product. So if that is the game plan, influencer marketing should be part of your concept, and it can be efficient reach when done properly to create awareness around your brand or product, especially around a product launch and or to help drive sales. Just go in with eyes wide open about how you're doing it. This is not a US phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon. It's not going away. Instagram's a huge platform for this, but also beware of potential fakes out there and make sure that whoever you're choosing has high engagement, has the potential to reach an audience with a specific message. Again, you're trying to reach the attention of their audience through an authentic channel, which is the whole reason why you're doing this, to act as word of mouth in a formalized way. So make sure that you have your KPIs set up ahead of time, that you guys agree on goals, and go into it with the mindset this is a collaboration between you and the creators as you go, because you do want it to be successful, especially as you are spending money in this space and want it to convert well.
Yep. Yeah. And so just once again, big shout out to Debra Aho Williamson, who was the author and lead analyst for Emarketer, for pulling this full report together. We really just skimmed and kind of scratched the surface of the great work that she and her colleagues did, as well as I want to say maybe a 25-minute podcast that she did that kind of touches on her highlights from this report, which is kind of a nice little appetizer, if you will, to the full thing. So thank you again for including us and letting us participate in this report, Debra. And we learned ourselves. We learned a ton from this. This is really interesting.
Yeah, very cool. And that podcast is Beyond the Numbers by Emarketer. So if you look that up in Apple Podcasts or iTunes, we're out there. If you're looking for us, we are called the Social Currency Podcast. You can find us at socialcurrencyshow.com. And you can head there to see every single episode that we've put up, as well as our blog posts and information about Jess and I. And we'll be posting, obviously, episodes every Monday. You can sign up for the newsletter and get the latest tidbits from us that are fresh weekly as we go. And follow Jess and I on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Jessica Jensen and at Tuck Ross. We really appreciate you guys listening. We have so much fun doing this and sharing info, and honestly appreciate the feedback, especially more lately. Like, we've been getting so many more positive notes. So thank you guys for saying that in. If you are listening, drop us some stars on especially iTunes or Apple Podcasts, because it really helps get that information obviously to Apple, but they help share it as part of the algorithm out further. And we just love seeing it and hearing your guys' feedback as we go. So thank you so much for that.
Yep.
All right, Jess, we're done with another one. We'll chat with you guys next week.
All right. See you later, Tuck. Bye, everyone.
See ya.